This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a 19th century philosophical idea that, surprisingly enough, provides an absolutely profound lens for understanding modern wealth inequality. If you've ever wondered how systemic power actually works and, why it's so incredibly hard to dismantle, you are exactly in the right place. We're going to unpack some brilliant source material that challenges the traditional academic reading of a famously complex philosophical story. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're starting with a super relatable modern anxiety. Think about it. If workers are the ones doing all the labor, and they're constantly growing their skills and their productivity, why does inequality just keep expanding? Like, why doesn't the wealth gap actually close as the workforce gets smarter and more capable? To answer this very real, very modern question, our source material takes us all the way back to a theory that influenced everyone from Karl Marx to modern sociologists.
Section 1. Hegel's Master and Slave.
So, according to the philosopher G.W.F. Hegel in his absolute masterwork, The Phenomenology of Spirit, when two conscious beings first meet, a struggle for recognition kicks off. It's a battle. The one who is willing to actually risk their life in this struggle becomes the independent master. They win! And their prize? Simply sitting back and consuming the fruits of the other person's labor. The one who clings to life out of fear, well, they become the dependent slave, forced to obey and to work. On the surface, it looks like a permanent, total victory for the master, right? But Hegel throws in a totally fascinating twist.
That twist relies on a really crucial German concept, Bildung. Basically, building means the process of self-formation, education, and cultural growth. Hegel argues that because the slave is the one actually forced to work on the external world, shaping materials, solving real problems, doing the physical labor, they are the ones genuinely going through this process of Bildung. The slave is literally shaping their own identity and capabilities precisely because they are forced to labor. And this perfectly sets up Hegel's famous reversal. It's this elegant philosophical flip. By doing absolutely nothing but consuming, the master actually loses their independence. They become completely, utterly dependent on the slave's labor just to survive. Meanwhile, the laboring slave, through all that hard work and Bildung, gains real skills, shapes the world around them, and achieves true, authentic independence. The whole dynamic completely flips. It's a beautifully optimistic academic theory.
Section 2. Masters aren't stupid.
But, as our source material so sharply points out, we need to take an abrupt detour from high-minded academic theory back down to grounded reality. It is time to dismantle this elegant little reversal. The master is not that stupid. Just think about that sentence. It totally shatters the idea that real-world masters just sit around lazily while their subordinates do literally all the learning. I mean, do we honestly believe that people in power just eat grapes and stare at the wall while the working class learns exactly how the whole world functions? No way.
The reality is both sides are learning. Both sides have their own unique form of Bildung going on. The slave's building is absolutely about producing, processing, and mastering practical skills. But the master's building, it's something entirely different. The master is actively learning how to govern, how to manage, how to allocate resources, and how to negotiate. They aren't getting dumber at all. They are just differentiating into a completely different skill set. And that skill set happens to be the exact one needed to maintain power.
Section 3. Systems and reproduction of rule.
Now, if we really want to understand why inequality is so incredibly stubborn, we have to look way beyond just individuals and talk about generational power. How does one person's advantage turn into a permanent societal divide? Well, step 1 might actually look exactly like Hegel's initial struggle, just raw individual dominance. But a real master doesn't stop there. They move right to step 2, the systematization of power. They write the rules around their victory, which inevitably leads to step 3, generational reproduction. The master passes down not just their initial win, but the entire system to their children.
Wealth, laws, army, bureaucracy, education, inheritance. These are the real tools of the master. The source material argues, and it makes total sense, that even if a master's heir is completely foolish and lazy, they are shielded by this massive systemic apparatus. A single worker's hard work, no matter how much personal building they achieve, cannot easily overcome a giant legal and bureaucratic system that was specifically designed to protect the master's descendants.
So the takeaway here is that education itself is heavily directed. The ruling class intentionally concentrates resources to reproduce their dominance. A worker's education is generally geared toward making them a highly efficient, productive worker, but the master's education, it's custom-tailored for learning how to rule, how to organize others, and how to manage capital. The system intentionally shapes the learning process to ensure the hierarchy stays exactly where it is.
Section 4. Why does inequality grow?
Let's bring this historical and philosophical critique all the way forward to modern capitalism. We're finally going to answer that initial hook about why the wealth gap persists and even widens today. For the worker, life is basically a linear loop. You provide labor, you gain some new skills through that labor, and that makes you capable of even better, more efficient labor. You definitely become highly competent, for sure, but mathematically speaking, you're stuck in a linear loop, working for a wage based strictly on your individual output.
Now contrast that with the capitalist loop. This is a compounding cycle. Capital generates profit, which is then immediately reinvested to create even more capital. The capitalist uses their specific Mastersbildung, all that specialized knowledge of management and organization we talked about, to take the workers' growing productivity and literally multiply their own wealth. They organize the labor specifically to fuel this compounding cycle.
So, impartially speaking, the stark reality we're left with is this. Because the capitalist loop compounds while the labor loop is linear, the worker's growth simply does not close the gap. Ironically, a worker's increasing competence and efficiency in a capitalist system can actually accelerate the master's accumulation of wealth. It ends up strengthening the very system they are working under.
Section 5. What makes a desirable society? And this leads us to our final big societal takeaway. We really need to question a core assumption shared by both Hegel and later thinkers like Marx. They believe that internal contradictions inevitably lead to sudden, progressive reversals or revolutions. But history shows us that systems reproduce themselves far more often than they violently reverse. The source points out that, yes, massive reversals like the French Revolution absolutely did happen. And Hegel literally lived through that era, so of course it influenced him. But treating a violent reversal as some universal law of history completely ignores the overwhelming everyday power of social reproduction we just explored. Systems are incredibly, stubbornly good at surviving. Because when a societal reversal actually does happen, it follows a pretty brutal path. Contradiction leads to conflict, which ultimately leads to a violent reversal. And the historical reality of this, it's severe destruction. Living through a revolution means utter chaos, the loss of livelihoods, and extreme, terrifying danger for everyday people. It's not just some neat philosophical chapter neatly turning over in a textbook. Now contrast that revolutionary model with a self-correcting system. In this scenario, a contradiction leads to discovery, which prompts an adjustment, eventually resulting in stability. This is exactly what happens when a system actually learns and adapts before it hits a total breaking point. Think about passing labor laws, creating Social Security, or expanding voting rights. The system makes necessary adjustments to survive and improve without having to burn the whole house down. Avoidable revolutions might be historical progress, but they destroy the lives of those who live through them. Wow. That is a deeply profound, totally neutral reflection right there. In a history book, a violent reversal might look like a necessary, even positive step forward for humanity. But honestly, if you were to ask the everyday people caught right in the middle of it, it's really not an era most people would ever want to be born into.
So this leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question to chew on. Will we build a society that stubbornly waits for a violent reversal to fix systemic inequality, or will we build one that constantly self-corrects? Because understanding that the master is always learning and that systems are designed to reproduce themselves gives us the real clarity needed to demand continuous, proactive adjustments. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this gave you a powerful new framework for looking at the world around us. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.